So we're finding out that one of the reasons that Super Sentai was canceled is because Hasbro bought Power Rangers. Let's talk about it. Welcome to the Legacy of Nerd. My name is Daniel. We got some news in the Super Sentai Power Rangers world that we need to talk about. We missed a couple things. I was dealing with the holidays, Thanksgiving, and I got married this last weekend. So, wasn't really making videos or concerned about that because I was obviously busy. But let's talk about the first piece of news. The first piece of news was that Project Red was announced. It's the new series from Toei, the new Tokusatsu series that will be taking over the Super Sentai slot. So they did come out and say Super Sentai has been formally canceled, that they're not saying it's never coming back. They're leaving that door open, but for now they're focused on Project Red. Project Red seems to be merging elements of Super Sentai and Metal Heroes and make it into something new. And they're going to start with the first series, Super Space Sheriff Gavin Infinity. And it's going to be a new red hero. And it's just a whole new thing that they're focused on. And that's the future that they are hoping for right now. So that announcement came. And with that, we got a couple reports from Japan, some new interviews and some new articles that I want to talk about. So the first one came from Livedoor News, where they're interviewing a Super Sentai Tokusatsu expert from Japan named Mr. Tane. And he kind of breaks down some of the numbers here of why Super Sentai hasn't been doing well and kind of gives some explanations of that. So he was saying in 2017, they would lump the numbers together of Super Sentai and Power Rangers that Bandai made in Super Sentai and Power Ranger toy sales. In 2017, they made 21 billion yen. And here he specifies that 8.8 billion of that came from Japan. So what he is saying here is we know that Super Sentai is limited to Japan and some Asian countries. So the rest of that is Power Rangers. So what he's saying here is that Power Rangers was making, was at 12.2 or 12.1 billion yen for Bandai. Sounds like Power Rangers was making the bulk of the money there for Toei. Now, Bandai is partly owned by Toei. So Toei owns a stake in Bandai. So Bandai, we all knew, made the toys for Power Rangers for years and years and years up until Hasbro bought it. So basically what was happening here was that Toei would get the cut of, Power Rangers using Super Sentai footage. Well, they were also getting a cut of all the toys because Bandai was making it because they were part owners of Bandai. So they were in a really good position of making quite a bit of money from Power Rangers for almost 30 years, whether it be from Saban and Disney. But when Saban sold Power Rangers to Hasbro obviously took the toy rights with them because they're a toy manufacturer, and Bandai no longer had access to, the toy revenue coming in from Power Rangers. Yeah, they were still getting whatever they were negotiating for the Super Sentai footage, but that big amount of chunk of toy sales was no longer there. So they're losing 12.1 billion yen. And I was trying to do the math. I think it's somewhere north of $120 million. So they're losing that on a yearly basis, 100 plus, we'll just say $100+ million every year. And you got to remember, they just said Japan is only making 8.8 billion yen a year. So they're losing a big chunk of money that is coming in from Power Rangers every single year because Hasbro bought Power Rangers. And I know, I put out the news about that, and a lot of people are saying it's Hasbro's fault. It's Hasbro's fault. But I mean, Hasbro just bought something like this. This was always going to be the plan of, no matter who sold it, that they were going to get the toy rights. The question is whether they left it with Bandai or not. And we'll talk about that in a second because it seems like Bandai didn't want it either. Now, there's some other reasons here too. And they do talk about some other properties, like Kamen Rider is making 30 billion yen a year. Ultraman is making somewhere between 14 and 20 billion yen a year. So Super Sentai was already making in Japan less than Ultraman and Kamen Rider individually as well, because they were making 8.8 in Japan. Well, they reported that last year, Bandai reported that they made 6.5 billion yen in Super Sentai toy sales. That's all they're counting now. So not only, did they lose the big chunk of Power Rangers toy sales, they're now losing, it seems they're on a decline in Japan of what Super Sentai is there. So there's another reason for decline, it's decline in popularity. Now, why is it declining in popularity? Well, they gave two reasons. So the first reason is the declining birth rate in Japan. There's less children being born in Japan, right? And one thing about Toei and TVSI is that they don't release the ratings of their shows, like, Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. But what they base that off of is how many children there are in Japan, because the consensus is that most children are watching Super Sentai and Kamen Rider. And so there's less children to be watching in Japan, so there's less interest in Super Sentai. And another reason they're talking about is the rise of smartphones. So there's more things competing for children's interest in whatever is on. So whether it's Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. So they're saying that Super Sentai declined basically because modernization of technology and more media at the hands of children, and then less children combined already. So they're saying that basically for years, Power Rangers was basically the model for Toei to keep Super Sentai on. And I know what you're thinking, like, oh man, this is not coming from Toei. Toei's not saying that, but we're not even on the second interview yet. And talking about the reaction to that, like I said, a lot of people are blaming Hasbro. And I don't know if Hasbro is the one to blame. I would blame Saban more because Saban is the one that sold it to Hasbro. But like when a company buys a property, like I said, like they're going to use it, right? They're going to want to see the maximum amount of profit from themselves. And they probably saw how much Bandai was making and was like, we want that. And even though that was the original plan, right? We can all talk about all day about what Hasbro's doing about Power Rangers, but that was the original plan, was like, we wanted that cut if we're going to buy Power Rangers. And that was their intention, was to basically get the 12.1 billion yen, which is whatever is like 120 plus million dollars, and be able to profit off of that. Now, the second report comes from an interview from Toei Executive, I'm trying to do the pronunciation here, Shinichiro Shirakura. And so he is interviewed here, and they're talking about Project Red, but they're talking about why Super Sentai was canceled as well. And he gives a little bit more different reasons. He doesn't like go into like the money aspect of it. But one thing he does talk about is the rise of streaming. So he said like, streaming is good because, it gives more access to that, to new media, to new people, right? But here's the thing. Now, the current season of Super Sentai was competing with older seasons of Super Sentai. So, like, where people before had to go look for Jew Ranger, Dai Ranger, Kaku Ranger, and all that stuff, they now had it at their fingertips of it. So they now were spending time watching a show that was, 30 years old, instead of watching a show that was currently on week to week, because they could binge it, stream it, whatever it is. It was just easier for them to get a hold of than what is something new. Another factor that he contributes is the Marvel wave. So like the rise of superhero and comic book hero movies. And he says like Marvel is huge in Japan. Like the Marvel movies are like very, very big, just they are like everywhere else. And interest in that is taking over the interest of Super Sentai. Again, we're talking about competing media for children's attention, right? And that is another reason why Super Sentai was canceled. He also talked about there was a big like taking for granted of Super Sentai. Like everyone always knew it was on, and basically everyone always knew what was going to happen. They knew it was always going to be on, and they didn't need to watch every episode or watch every season because they knew that they could just go watch it whenever they wanted because it's been on for 50 years. So he's talking about like a taking for granted of the show among the population because it's always been there. Like, there's been a lot of reports of people saying like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I've been watching it with my children for years. I watched it with my children when I had children and stuff like that. And it's a Japanese staple. And I think that's the only thing I kind of like attributed to here is maybe like, and it's not the same because it's not children's show, but like maybe The Simpsons. The Simpsons is always on and we always know it's on. But I don't know if there's a lot of people that watch every episode anymore because we just know like we can watch it whenever we want, right? Maybe kind of Sesame Street, but like Sesame Street, I think is more comparable. At the same time, like it's changed like where it's been for so many times. It was on PBS. It was on it's on Netflix now, but it was on HBO Max before. Like it's always been on. It's a staple of American children. We always expect it to be on, but it's struggled. Sesame Street has struggled, and finding people to be able to have a home, and that kind of like confused. Like why couldn't like Super Sentai do that? Like find a new home, and maybe they did try to find a new home, and just nobody picked it up, and that's a big possibility as well. So that's kind of like another reason as to why they're saying that Super Sentai was canceled. He even mentioned, he does talk about Power Rangers, and he said he joined Toei in 1990 when they were planning Jew Ranger, which is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And he said at that time they really thought that Jew Ranger was going to be the last of the Super Sentai series. Like, so they kind of went all out in the Jew Ranger series. One of the big things that happened was when Jew Ranger was adapted into Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, it just created this whole worldwide surge for, more content, more Power Rangers, and it basically revitalized Super Sentai. And he said he attributes to Power Rangers and that Mighty Morphin Power Ranger series to basically helping Super Sentai being on for the next 30 years. So we have a Toei executive right here attributing right now Super Sentai or Power Rangers saving Super Sentai for the next 30. He says in the interview, he truly believes that Power Rangers kept Super Sentai on the air for the next 30 years because of that 1990 Mighty Morphin Power Ranger wave, which is crazy because I don't know if we've ever had, like, we've had people attribute, Power Rangers, helping Super Sentai in different ways, but not like saving it, which is cool. I mean, it's cool to know, like, Power Rangers was such a big part of why Super Sentai continued on for so long, which, yeah. So that's that interview. With that, I can't show like any screenshots from that interview because it's a paid interview, so I'll use Anime News Network here for some of the text here. But it's cool. Like, he even talks about, like, they changed like the Sixth Ranger, which is the Dragon Ranger, which is the Green Ranger, coming to mid series. Like, they were experimenting then, right? And because we knew for a while there, where Hasbro, there was reports from Hasbro that they were going to stop using Super Sentai footage, and I think you can start that with Dawn Brothers, like Dawn Brothers, Zenkaiger, maybe even King Oger. What is the other one that was just out? Boom Boomger. Like, those ones, I don't know if they would do really well in American audiences. Even Kira Major, I don't see them like doing well. And that's probably where Toei was experimenting more, because they knew no longer they were going to have, Power Rangers to help them. So they were trying to make more interest in the Super Sentai in Japan and its territories that it can release. So it's kind of like interesting to think about, like, when you start to kind of put everything together, like what the companies were doing, and especially with Zenkaiger, like, that was very, very different, and how that didn't necessarily work enough for them to save Super Sentai now, which is I think it's a whole new rabbit hole that we could go down. So, and then I do want to talk about this other report. So we got this report from Chris from Toku Nation. And he said he had sources that said that back in 2017, Saban did offer Power Rangers to Bandai to buy, like for Bandai to own Power Rangers, but Bandai declined. And then in 2018, we all know about the sale of Power Rangers to Hasbro for, it was like $522 million in worth. I think it's like cash and stock and stuff like that. So they all got, Bandai had a chance. Bandai had a chance to get Power Rangers, but they didn't want it. He kind of explains a little bit more that there was a big turnover in Bandai from 2017, from the movie from 2017, 2018, that apparently Bandai was very upset with Power Rangers because a lot about the movie stuff. He put an example, and I hope I'm saying this correctly. He said that there was a lot of talk about the Megazord, where basically Power Rangers gave Bandai the Megazord and said, figure it out. And like, this is designed, this is what they look like, the dinosaurs, this is what the Megazord looks like, figure out how they go together. And Bandai was like, how do they go together? And he's like, we don't know. We're not going to show that on screen, but you figure it out. And he said that was one of like a contributing factor. That was all under Saban, and that movie was under Lionsgate as well. So, I mean, you can take that from what you will. But I think the big thing here is that people are attribute is that Bandai could have had Power Rangers, but they didn't want it. And we all know, like, the Legacy line is so loved now, compared to some of the things that we've gotten since then. But I remember back then that people were complaining about the Legacy stuff. And it's kind of crazy to think about now, especially with how much it costs on the second market. But the Legacy stuff people were complaining about back then, just like they're complaining about the stuff now. So it's just, it's kind of weird to kind of think about everything as a whole and, kind of remember how things were back then and back, and now as far as that goes. But yeah, that's a lot of news to kind of like grasp, but I don't know. I know like Toku Twitter is not happy about this report because they, I think when you look at things from when you're inside the fandom, especially like the Power Rangers fandom, and probably any fandom that is, and I was trying to explain it to my wife the other day, and it's like how some people like believe like Marvel is better than DC, and they will die on that hill absolutely, and they will defend it and whatever, whatever, and DC, Marvel, whatever which way. But when they believe something so strong, you cannot convince them any otherwise. And it's the same thing with Super Sentai and Power Rangers. Like there's like this divide of it, right? And like the people on. I don't see it so much on the Power Ranger side, but more so on like the Super Sentai side and the Toku side, where they're just like. They talk down about Power Rangers, like it's dead. They're like, Power Rangers is dead. I'm like, well, like Super Sentai is ending. And yeah, it's kind of like they're going through the same thing and we knew like when Cosmic Fury was out, we knew Power Rangers was going to end. And, we know now that Super Sentai is going to end, even though we have Gojuger, and you're just like, they're having very similar things right now. I guess the difference is that we know that Power Rangers is getting a reboot with Disney Plus, and then Super Sentai is being replaced by Project Red. So I think that's the major difference. And going back to my original point about Toku Twitter, is just like they see this report and they just either don't accept it, or they're just like they pivot to like, well, Power Rangers wouldn't exist because of Super Sentai. Well. That's true. Power Rangers would not exist because of Super Sentai, but it sounds like Super Sentai would have not continued on because of Power Rangers. Wow. So yeah, that's a lot of news. Lots to take in. Let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about this report? I mean, I think it's kind of like common sense. And if you if you step yourself outside the fandom and look at everything as a whole, I think it's really easy to see. And I think a lot of people do see that. At least, I hope they do. But I think it kind of gives you more of an idea of why Super Sentai was canceled, why everything's going on with Power Rangers. And, you can kind of see where it might go. And going off of these reports and interviews, especially from Japan, at least they're releasing interviews from Japan about Super Sentai. We just got a press release just recently that Power Rangers is getting a reboot. And that's the first official word we got from Hasbro about it. So, yeah. But yeah, I diverge, and we that's a whole new rabbit hole we could probably go down. But let me know in the comments what you guys think. What do you guys think about those reports? What do you think about Super Sentai essentially what do you think about Power Rangers essentially keeping the lights on for Super Sentai? What do you think about that relationship between Power Rangers and Super Sentai? Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and y'all know what time it is. It's morphin' time.